So now we'll hear from Pat.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to be very clear that I'm very excited about what we're doing in social media. But what I plan to do today is sort of challenge our think a little bit, because I grew up in western Kansas and spent a lot of time in Colorado. And so when we were dealing with H1N1, it was interesting to me that because I work for the government now, the number of emails and contacts that I got from teachers because of the school situation, from health department folks who are in lots of rural settings, and nurse practitioners that are around the country. So I think we're doing a great job getting started, but when you look at the real world and who it is we're really touching, you know, I just have some real questions about the demographics and how we think about those demographics. One of my background areas is community-based participatory research, and so one of the first questions I always ask is, who is it that's advising us? And so frequently we have the wonderful, talented, and perhaps if I can just make reference to differences in ages, because I'm very well aware of that today, that we have wonderfully young, bright people, that this is really where I think the future is. But when I look at what's happening in the digital divide in nursing, and actually with a lot of physicians, I didn't ask the question about the 60% of the physicians that are using social media, how many of those are primary care docs, number one, and how many of those are in rural or urban communities. And so when we look at our nation, and I think we look at our nation's health, it's very easy to hit the obvious. And so I'm glad that we're doing that, but I think the question is, how do we get a handle on the demographics of who we're touching? We know that social media is very prominent in 18 to 34. I know what happens in a lot of families is it's the teenager that's actually contacting grandma and granddad to tell them what it is that's going on, because they may not even be watching the news on CNN or whatever other radio or television station. It doesn't surprise me that there's as much on the radio as there is when you think about the larger population in our urban and rural communities. Most people listen to the radio on the way into work, and if you commute in this area of the country, that can be up to an hour that you're on the radio. It depends on what you're listening to. And the other point I'm so glad you made is, again, if you bring community-based groups together of the populations you're trying to reach, then those individuals can tell you how it is that is the best way to communicate with them. And then also just the health literacy issues. You know, I'm very familiar with the gov.dot sites, but when you get on there, if you're not sophisticated to try to find the information that you're looking for, and if you're not health oriented, and I would come back to where we know from social network modeling that the first place that it was true in the H1N1 was schools, and we know we want to close schools. But there was very little coming out through NEA or any of the other education sites to really reach the teachers. And so I think when we think about those larger populations, that we have a lot of groups that physicians don't touch. We have a lot of groups in rural health departments, and I'm so glad you mentioned the Indian Health Service, because having worked in the West, the other issue I guess that I would raise is the trust issue. And we know with a growing multicultural society, we have some major issues around trust. And so even if we can have an authority verified website, that doesn't necessarily mean that certain populations in our country are going to actually trust that information. As I was preparing for this, I was really in touch with most of my young friends to really talk about what it is that they look for. So I was really pleased to hear the use of entertainment, because what we talk about today, even in education, is edutainment. You know, you don't really educate anymore in the old traditional ways. If it's not entertaining, the students are not going to be there. And so I think it is a rethink of a lot of what we're doing, but the most important thing is to be very clear about who we're targeting, and then how is it that we get that voice at the table. So many times in my experience, we have wonderfully smart, educated people from very urban populations that are advising us about what is high impact and what is low risk, and it may or may not reflect the people that we're trying to touch base with. Now, I've done community-based participatory research. It's a very long and arduous process, so I sort of liked your comment, Andrew, about we've got to find different ways to do that. So how is it that we get those populations together in smaller circles to get that information to say what would be the best way for me to reach you? And then how is it that we identify entertainment groups that I know are, I mean, they're going around the world disseminating food, and so I'm sure that they would be helpful to us to disseminate information. So how do we think about that in a way that reaches that 18 to 34, which is where predominantly social media is, but the 35 to about 58, it's really still the traditional web, and we have a lot of health literacy issues. And then from 58 up, which is where a lot of the chronic care management issues are, just like your survey said, is it television, is it radio? And one of the questions that I asked when I was preparing for this is how it is that we trust that information, and 2 points were raised for me, which I hadn't really thought about for a while, and that is, can you really trust the FDA? Because one day they tell you that you shouldn't eat eggs, and the next day they tell you you should, and one day the milk is bad for you if you're not a certain age, and the next day it is. And so, again, we come back to this information and the confusing aspect of the information that causes people to say, I don't know if I just really am going to listen to that at all, because it's just going to confuse what it was I thought I understood the last time I heard them. And it's because of health literacy issues, I think, that we don't clarify as much that maybe that piece of information is for X population and this piece of information is for Y population, but I think we still have those gaps. So I guess my bottom line is, how is it that we be very clear about who we're trying to reach with what, number one, and number two, how is it that we can artfully engage the communities we're trying to target? And use the connection to connection, even if it's younger to older in some ways, or how it is that we also reach that large rural population that we have across this country that do want to be engaged, but find it very, very difficult to sort out what it is that's coming out of the Beltway. It's just amazing to me when I go home what I'm used to digesting every day, and what it is that I cannot find anything out about once I get out into the hinterlands. So I guess I'm just going to challenge us to think to the next stage. I'm excited about what we're doing, and I'm excited about the initiatives, but I think we have to have the community, and however we define that, involved with the wonderfully smart heads that we have at most of the tables.